The cowboy lost his horse, but the next day the horse returned with an Apache beauty on its back. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Jared Colton pressed his shoulder against the cabin door as the wind roared like a freight of demons tearing through the valley. The night sky split open with jagged streaks of lightning, each flash throwing the barren mesa into sharp relief. His lantern swung wildly on its hook, casting broken light across the porch. He could feel the storm chewing at the land, ripping shingles loose, driving dust into every crack. But it wasn't the storm that set his jaw hard and tight. It was the silence between thunderclaps. The silence where he ought to hear the steady, familiar breath of his stallion out in the corral. He pushed the door open, rifle already in his hand, boots sinking into mud as rain pelted his hat brim. His chestnut stallion, the only true companion left to him, was gone. The corral gate swung open on its hinge, wood splintered as if kicked through. Hoofprints stamped deep in the mud stretched toward the darkness, already smearing under the driving rain. Jared cursed low, words carried away by the wind. He knelt at the gate, running a calloused hand over the muddied prints. They were fresh. His horse had been taken only an hour past, maybe less. He stood, eyes narrowing at the black horizon where the storm swallowed every sound. Neighbors had warned him the Apaches were scouting close, their shadows moving just beyond the ridges. A missing horse meant more than theft. It meant scouts, raids, a noose tightening around the settlement. "They didn't just take my horse," he muttered, voice thick with anger. "They took my blood." He leaned the rifle against his shoulder and scanned the land. Lightning tore across the sky again, lighting the far-off buttes like ghostly sentinels. For a heartbeat, he swore he saw movement along the ridge, shapes that weren't rock. When the light faded, the darkness seemed thicker, heavier. Jared pulled the brim of his hat lower and stepped back onto the porch. His hand gripped the rifle tighter, knuckles white. The hours bled slow. He sat on the porch, boots tapping restlessly against the boards, listening to the storm choke itself out. The wind fell quiet, leaving only the hiss of rain easing into drizzle. His mind roamed places he didn't want it to go. His brother lying in the dirt years ago after a fight over grazing rights. The hollow vow Jared had sworn at that grave, never again to let another soul steal what was his by sweat and sacrifice. And yet here he sat, waiting, powerless, watching the last drops fall from the eaves as dawn crept near. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats. Dull at first, then stronger, rolling steady across the wet ground. He rose to his feet, rifle leveled toward the open plain. The first light of morning spread across the land, a pale wash over soaked earth. From the mist, a dark figure took shape, forelegs pounding mud, mane whipping wild. His stallion. Relief surged sharp through Jared's chest, but it caught halfway. Because the horse wasn't alone. On its back sat a rider upright and unafraid. A woman. Her long black hair bound with beads, her gaze fixed forward as if the storm had been nothing but wind in her face. She guided the stallion with the easy grace of someone born in the saddle. The dawn lit her features, proud and calm. Apache through and through. Jared's finger tightened on the trigger. The horse slowed, hooves sucking at the mud as it neared the corral. The woman dismounted, her moccasins landing soft against the soaked earth. She did not run. She did not flinch. She looked at him with steady dark eyes, rain still dripping from her braids. Jared's chest burned. His horse had returned, but it had brought a stranger with it, and not just any stranger. An Apache beauty stood before him, silent, unbending, like dawn itself had carried her out of the storm. Jared's knuckles whitened around the rifle stock as the Apache woman slid down from his stallion's back. The morning light caught the beads woven into her raven hair, making them gleam like tiny sparks in the damp air. She moved with the quiet grace of someone unafraid, someone who had walked through storms before and would again. Her moccasins pressed into the mud without a sound. Jared took a step forward, rifle leveled steady, his voice cut sharp through the silence. "Why's my horse under you?" She looked at him, her dark eyes holding no tremor, no plea. "He was wandering," she said, her tone calm but edged with iron. "I rode him back." The words hung between them, unbelievable and yet too direct to be dismissed outright. Jared's jaw clenched. He'd heard too many stories. Men lured into trust, then cut down, their homesteads burned while they bled in the dust. He studied her closely, waiting for the lie, for the twitch of deceit. But she stood as if carved from stone, her gaze steady on his. You expect me to believe that? He asked. Believe what you wish, she said quietly. The storm breaks fences, scatters herds. I found him running wild in the wash. The stallion tossed its head behind her, ears flicking at Jared's voice. The sight of his horse safe should have softened him, but it didn't. The unease in his chest only grew heavier. He felt something dangerous in her stillness, an honesty that left no room for mockery. Before he could speak again, the thump of hooves came fast from the east. Dust rose, curling against the pale sky, and soon a rider came into view. Hank Palmer, his neighbor, a wiry man with a face tanned like rawhide and suspicion etched into every line. He reined up hard at the corral, spitting into the mud before his words spat sharper. Well, I'll be damned, Hank said, glaring at the woman. You've caught yourself one, Colton. Should have known the Apaches were nosing around. His eyes flicked to Jared's rifle. Don't waste time. Tie her up. Sheriff will know what to do. The woman turned toward Hank without flinching, shoulders square, chin lifted. Her voice carried clear. Do what you must. I speak truth. Hank barked a bitter laugh. They all got silver tongues when the rope's near. Jared's finger hovered against the trigger. He wanted to trust his own rage, his own suspicion, yet something in him resisted. The way she stood, proud, unyielding, her words stripped of fear. It unsettled him more than any threat. He lowered the rifle an inch, though his heart thumped harder for it. Don't be a fool, Jared, Hank snapped, watching the barrel drop. She's trouble on 2 feet. Ain't you heard what they do? Jared's answer caught in his throat as the ground itself began to hum. Another sound, heavier than one rider. A low rumble rolling over the plain. Dust lifted far on the horizon, the unmistakable cloud of riders coming fast. Jared's eyes narrowed, breath caught in the morning chill. He still hadn't decided what she was, thief, liar, or something else entirely. But the sound of those hooves meant one truth was certain. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. The rumble on the horizon grew heavier until the first riders cut through the dust. They slowed as they reached the corral, their horses snorting steam into the chill morning air. At their head rode Sheriff Mallory, a man whose eyes carried the weight of too many years and too many compromises. His gray coat hung loose on his frame, and his jaw worked slow as he surveyed the scene before him. Jared with his rifle low, the Apache woman standing unflinching, and Hank watching like a dog waiting for its master's nod. The deputies fanned out, circling Ayoka as if she were already branded guilty. Their horses shifted, restless, hooves chewing the wet ground. Mallory slid from his saddle with a grunt, boots squelching into the mud. He looked at Jared first, then at the woman. His voice was low, deliberate, almost weary. Colton, he said, harbor her and you'll answer for it. Times are tense. One spark and the whole valley burns. Jared's grip tightened on the rifle. He didn't speak. Mallory turned his gaze on Ayoka. She met it head on, chin raised, eyes steady. There was no fear there, only defiance held tight under calm. Mallory exhaled slow, then faced Jared again. Army garrison up north is paying good for Apache captives. Don't matter if they're raiders or not. They'll take her, give you coin, and keep peace in this county. The words sat foul in Jared's gut. He bristled, his teeth grinding. You're talking about selling her like a mule. Mallory's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. I'm talking about keeping blood off our doorsteps. One woman's pride don't weigh against 20 families trying to sleep at night. Ayoka said nothing, but the fire in her eyes burned hotter. She turned her gaze to Jared, silent, unyielding, and it unsettled him more than Mallory's bargain. That kind of pride could not be bought or broken. It demanded choice. Jared's chest tightened as his thoughts slipped backward unbidden to the day his brother fell. A land dispute with a wealthy rancher, one side backed by paper deeds, the other by sweat and calluses. The rifle had cracked, his brother's body slumped into dust, and Jared had sworn with blood on his hands that no innocent would be ground under greed again. Yet here he stood, rifle in hand, Mallory's offer whispering peace bought cheap. Mallory saw the hesitation and pressed harder. Think it through, Colton. You hand her over, this storm blows past. You keep her, and it don't just fall on you. It falls on every homestead from here to the ridge. Jared's throat worked as he tried to breathe through the weight of it. Hank leaned from his saddle, spitting in the mud again. Sheriff's right. You best see sense. Ayoka finally spoke, her voice low but cutting clear as steel. You give me to them, you bury truth in chains. Do what you will. My blood is mine, not yours to trade. The words hit Jared harder than the storm had. He saw his brother's face, remembered the hollow in his chest the day the grave closed. He had sworn an oath then, and oaths were not meant to be twisted for convenience. Yet still his rifle felt heavy and his silence felt heavier. Mallory stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Jared could hear. "By nightfall, Colton. Hand her over. If you don't, you'll stand against me, and I'll make sure you stand alone." He turned back to his deputies, gave a nod, and they pulled their horses in tight before wheeling away. Hank lingered, sneering at Jared, then rode after them. The dust cloud followed the retreat, leaving the corral quiet again. Jared stood there, rifle slack in his grip, a yoke beside his horse, proud and unbroken. His brother's oath rattled like iron chains in his mind, but Mallory's ultimatum cut deeper than any blade. By nightfall he would have to choose, and the land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The sky burned with the last red streaks of daylight as Jared pulled the shutters closed. The valley outside lay heavy in silence, the air thick with that strange stillness that came before another storm. Inside the cabin, the scent of wood smoke clung to the rafters. A single candle flickered on the rough-hewn table, its light casting long shadows across the walls. Ayoka sat near the fire, her face calm in the glow. She had refused food at first, but after a long silence she accepted a piece of cornbread with a quiet nod. Jared leaned his rifle against the doorframe and lowered himself into the chair opposite her. His eyes studied her as if each detail might betray the truth. The braids threaded with beads, the sharp lines of her cheekbones, the pride etched in the way she carried herself even in the cramped space of his home. "You haven't told me why you were out there," Jared said at last. His voice was low, like he feared the night itself might be listening. She looked at the fire instead of him. "I was not hunting your horse. He crossed my path. I rode him back. That ain't all," Jared pressed. Her eyes finally turned to him, dark and steady. "My brother is dead. Settlers shot him over land that was never theirs. He was unarmed." She paused, her jaw tight as if holding back the rest of her grief. "I ride alone now." The words settled in Jared like stones sinking through water. He saw flashes of his own brother's fall, the land dispute, the moment his oath had been carved into his soul. Different people, different blood, but the wound was the same. Loss had its own language, one that needed no translation. "You carry it quiet," Jared murmured. Her gaze softened just slightly. "Loud grief feeds the vultures." For the first time, he felt something break through the suspicion that had gripped him since dawn. She wasn't a raider come to trick him. She was someone hollowed by the same kind of loss that hollowed him. That realization pressed hard against the sheriff's bargain, against the easy path of betrayal laid out before him. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. The scent of rain drifted in through the cracks. Jared rose uneasy. He felt the storm rolling close, its charge thick in the air. He set his hat on the table, ran a hand over his stubbled jaw, then turned to the window. Unseen by either of them, a figure lingered in the dark beyond the yard. Hank sat low in his saddle, watching the candlelit cabin with a sneer twisting his mouth. "He's turning soft," he muttered, spitting into the dirt. Too soft for what's coming. Thunder rolled low across the plains. The candle flame shivered as the pressure in the air deepened. Jared turned back toward Ahyoka, ready to speak again, when a crack tore through the night. The corral post outside exploded into splinters, the sound of a rifle echoing across the valley. Wood chips flew past Jared's face as he ducked instinctively, heart hammering, his hand clawing for the rifle by the door. The storm had found them, and it was bringing more than rain. The second shot came so close it kissed the door frame and left a grin of raw wood. Jared grabbed Ahyoka by the arm and pulled her to the floor as glass burst from the window and showered across the table. Smoke crept in through the gaps in the boards, oily, acrid, wrong. He crawled to the corner where his extra shells were stacked in a tin, thumbed rounds into the rifle with quick, sure movements. Outside men shouted to each other, boots thudding, horses snorting. He knew those voices. Hired hands from the Palmer spread. "Hanks, bring the Apache out," someone yelled. "She's bait. She'll draw the rest if they're near." Ayoka's breath came steady despite the chaos. She wiped a sliver of glass from her palm and sat up. "They want me," she said quietly. "No," Jared snapped. "They want a war they can point at and say they never started." He hauled open the trap under the bed and shoved her toward it. "Root cellar, go," she didn't move. "If they kill me, they kill truth. I will not hide." "Damn the truth," he said, throat raw. "I'm not handing them your blood." The door shuddered under a heavy boot. Colton. Hank's voice mean and eager. Open up. Sheriff's orders. Sheriff ain't here, Jared called back even as he felt dread slide cold under his ribs. He leveled his rifle at the window and fired once. A man screamed and fell hard into the mud. The porch erupted in curses. Torches flared bright in the yard, their light throwing wild shadows against the walls. More shots. Splinters stung Jared's cheek. He ducked, grabbed Ahyoka's wrist and dragged her to the cooking alcove where the chimney brick gave a hint of cover. Heat spidered through the room as stray torch fire licked at the eaves. The wind outside rose and dragged the flames sideways. Somewhere out in the dark, the stallion screamed, high, terrified, thrashing in smoke. Ahyoka flinched at the sound. They will burn him. They'll burn everything, Jared said. He kicked the table toward the door as a crude barricade and jammed a chair leg under the latch. Another bullet chewed the chair to splinters. He fired back through the gap and heard another man grunt and collapse. Circle the barn, Hank shouted. Smoke 'em out. The fire took to dry hay with a wicked joy. Light ballooned through the chinks in the barn boards, orange and frantic. The stallion shrieked again, hooves beating the floor. Jared pictured the animal's rolling eyes, the terrible press of heat. He swore and shouldered the door. The chair leg skittered across the floor. He threw the door open a crack, shoved the barrel through, and fired twice at the nearest torch. It fell and sputtered in mud. Men scattered for cover. Stay behind me, he told Ahyoka. She shook her head, eyes bright in the firelight. I stand with you. He didn't have time to argue. They dashed for the yard into a world unmade by flame and smoke. The air clawed his lungs. Heat slapped his face. Figures moved through the haze. Cowhands with bandanas up, rifles winking in the light. One tried to flank them. Jared put a round through the man's shoulder and drove him into the trough. Another rushed with a lariat raised. Ahyoka seized a fallen plank, pivoted, and cracked it against his knee. The man folded, cursing into the dirt. Back! Hank bellowed somewhere in the blur. Push 'em to the barn! They were already there. The barn doors jumped on their hinges from the stallion's panic. Jared shoved the crossbar free and hauled one door wide. Smoke billowed out, sparks flying like hornets. The horse's coat was slick with sweat and soot. The whites of its eyes flashed. Jared threw his arms around the bridle, voice low and fierce. Easy, boy. Easy. Ahyoka sprang to his side and clapped a damp blanket over the animal's face. Together they pulled, stumbling and choking until the stallion lunged into the open air and pawed the ground. Nostrils flaring. Bullets chewed the fence. Jared spun, firing at the muzzle flare by the haystack. The attacker pitched back with a howl. The yard seemed to explode with men. Hank's face appeared through smoke, eyes small and bright. You're finished, Jared. Hand her over or I'll bring your whole place down. Come take her, Jared shot back. Ahyoka took the stallion's reins and pressed them into Jared's hand. Go, she said. They want me. You can still choose safety. Not while I'm breathing, he answered. They moved together, a step left, a step right, using the horse as moving cover. Shots snapped past. A torch arced over the yard and fell onto a tumble of dry boards, birthing another greedy blossom of flame. Heat pinched Jared's eyes to slits. The world roared. Two ranch hands broke from the smoke, one with a shotgun high. Jared dropped to a knee and fired. The man with the shotgun tumbled, skidding on his back. The second kept coming. Ahyoka stepped into him, a blur of motion, and drove an elbow into his throat. He gagged and crumpled. Hank shouted for the men to hold, to regroup near the sycamore. He was calculating now, wary of the stubborn line Jared and the woman had drawn in the dirt. Jared used the pause to reload, breath tearing at his lungs. He looked at the cabin door and saw it sag under the hail of lead. He looked at the barn and saw the loft go up like a sunrise. This is my land, he said, half to himself, half to whatever listened, and I won't sell a soul to save it. Ahyoka heard him and nodded once. Then we stand. Damn right we stand. He pushed forward toward the sycamore where the attackers clustered. One man leaned around the trunk to sight. Jared squeezed off a shot that punched the man backward into the dust. Another lurched from behind the water wagon. Jared pivoted and fired again. The man's hat flew, body collapsing into the trough with a splash. Silence didn't follow. The fire howled and the wind fed it. The stallion danced sideways, terrified. Jared stepped ahead of the horse, putting himself between animal and bullets, and felt the line finally cross inside him, the one that separated a man from his neighbors when neighbors decided to become wolves. He caught movement to his left, a shadow slipping between brightness and black. He turned, brought the rifle up, and saw a shape rise from the smoke with a pistol drawn. He fired without thinking. The attacker flew back and stayed down. The echo rolled across the yard like thunder. Jared's chest heaved. Hands shook. He had just put another man in the ground, and the taste of it was iron and ash. He turned to check on Ahyoka, to pull her back toward the house where the stone hearth might still hold a pocket of safety, when a voice he had prayed not to hear came from the living dark behind the sycamore. Drop the rifle. Colton. The smoke parted as if the night itself yielded to him. Sheriff Mallory stepped from the shadows. Coat gray, eyes colder than the rain-licked metal in his hands. His rifle was steady, the muzzle aimed square at Jared's heart. Mallory's rifle never wavered, the firelight painting his face in hard planes of shadow. The shouts of the ranch hands grew faint around them, as if even they were waiting on his word. He stepped closer, boots crunching in the scorched dirt, and when he spoke it was with a sneer that carried both weariness and venom. "You think this is about you, Colton?" he said. "About your damned horse? No, I sent Palmer and his men. I told them to bring the girl in. She's not just a captive. She's the last thread keeping her people's claim alive. Once she's gone, this land opens clean for settlers. No disputes, no treaties, no Apache blood crying foul. Just profit." Ahyoka stood unshaken, her face lit by the burning barn behind her. "You cannot bury the dead with lies," she said. Her voice cut through the smoke like a blade. "Their bones will rise against you." Mallory's eyes flicked to her with cold amusement. "Maybe, but bones don't sign contracts. And the army pays for captives, pays good. You, Colton, you could have had a share of it if you weren't so damn stubborn." Jared's rifle sagged an inch as the truth struck him. His breath came rough. "So it's greed all along," he muttered. "All the talk of safety, of peace. Just greed." Mallory's mouth curled into something like a smile. "Peace is just the name we give to the order bought with someone else's blood." He raised his voice then, calling over his shoulder. "Bind him!" Two ranch hands, smoke-blackened and coughing, moved in with rope. Jared backed a step, but the muzzle at his chest froze him in place. He had to watch as rough hands seized his arms, twisting them behind his back. The rope bit into his wrists. "Sheriff," one of the men called. "Flames are climbing high. We'll lose the place." "Let it burn," Mallory said flatly. "This land won't belong to Colton much longer." The smoke thickened, stinging eyes, choking lungs. Sparks whirled in the hot wind, clinging to clothes. Jared tried to fight, but the rope cut deeper. He felt the press of betrayal like an old wound torn open. His own people, men he'd drunk with, worked beside, were stringing him up like a thief. Mallory leaned close, his voice low and full of poison. "You chose the wrong side, Colton. You chose her. Now you'll swing with her if I say the word." Jared lifted his head, eyes burning from more than the smoke, and found Ahyoka through the haze. She stood tall despite the chaos, wrists still free, her gaze locked on his. Without a word, she stepped toward him. Mallory let her pass, amused, certain she was beaten. When she reached Jared, her hand brushed his bound fingers. He felt something press into his palm, small and hard. A token, carved bone smooth with years of handling. She met his eyes and gave the faintest nod. The fire roared louder. Flames licked higher, and Jared clenched the secret object in his fist, hope sparking where none should have survived. The carved token dug into Jared's palm as though it had a heartbeat of its own. He curled his fist tighter, feeling the etched grooves, the faint ridges of a design he half remembered from years past. Through smoke and flickering firelight, he angled it in his bound hands and saw it plain. A seal burned into the bone, the mark of an agreement struck years ago between settlers and the Apache. He had seen one like it once when his brother showed him the papers that Mallory and the land agents later swore didn't exist. Jared's breath caught. This was proof, not just of a treaty but of the sheriff's treachery. Mallory had broken it, buried it, and soaked the ground in blood to make way for his profit. He pressed the edge of the token against the rope at his wrists, sawing slow at first, then faster as sparks drifted down around him like fiery snow. The smoke clawed at his lungs, but he kept cutting, teeth gritted. Mallory paced nearby, smug and certain, his rifle still trained. "You can't fight what's coming," Mallory said. "This whole valley belongs to the ones willing to take it. Men like you, Colton, you waste yourself on old promises." The rope gave with a sudden snap. Jared felt his arms surge free. He didn't hesitate. With a roar torn from his gut, he lunged. His shoulder slammed into Mallory's chest, driving the sheriff back hard into the dirt. The rifle clattered from his hands, firing once into the air before skidding out of reach. The ranch hands jerked in shock. guns half raised but not yet fired. Jared rolled to his knees, chest heaving, and shot his hand high, the token gleaming in the firelight. "Look at this," he bellowed, voice cutting through the chaos. "Look at the token! Look at the truth Mallory buried." The men hesitated, eyes darting between Jared, the token, and the sheriff gasping in the dirt. Some of them had heard whispers of old agreements, of promises broken. Now they saw the proof carved in bone, undeniable. Their grips loosened on their rifles. Ayoka stepped forward, her face lit by the blaze, eyes blazing hotter than the fire itself. "Your law or ours? Justice waits," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that shook the men where they stood. The fire cracked and roared. Mallory scrambled to his knees, blood streaking his cheek where Jared had driven him down. His eyes burned with fury, not fear. He spat in the dirt, sneering. "You think they'll follow you?" he snarled, his voice rasping through the smoke. "You think a scrap of bone changes what I built? You'll never turn them against me, not in my town." His words hung like poison in the air, and the night seemed to tighten around them, holding its breath for what came next. Dawn crept slow over the valley, washing the world in a pale light that seemed almost too quiet after the night's fury. Smoke still coiled from the ruins of the barn, drifting toward the town like a warning carried on the breeze. Word had spread fast, faster than fire. By the time Jared and Ayoka walked into the square, a crowd had already gathered. Farmers, shopkeepers, wives with children clutched tight, faces tight with fear and curiosity. They stood in a circle, whispering, watching, waiting. Jared stepped into the center, the bone token raised in his hand. His shirt was torn, his knuckles bloodied, and his voice carried the gravel of exhaustion, but it rang strong. "You've all heard tales," he said. "Tales of treaties, of promises made then broken. This here is no tale. It's proof." He held the token higher, turning it so the carved seal caught the morning sun. "This belonged to her people. It marks the land we stand on. Land Mallory swore was theirs by agreement. He buried it, and he buried men to keep it quiet." A ripple ran through the crowd. Murmurs grew. Faces turned, suspicion rising like dust on the wind. Ayoka stood beside him silent, her presence defiant in its stillness. Jared glanced at her, then back at the people. "Last night I fought neighbors, men I thought I knew. They came because Mallory told them lies. He told them she was the danger. But the danger was standing behind a badge, feeding on our silence." From the edge of the crowd, a voice broke out. Old Mrs. Penner, her back bent with years, raised a shaking hand. "Mallory cheated me of my husband's land. Said the papers were gone." Her words cracked, but her eyes burned clear. Another voice followed, a shopkeeper tight-faced. "He took coin from both sides of a deal. Threatened me to keep shut, then another, and another." One by one, the silence shattered. Men and women who had swallowed their shame for years found it rising, unchained, spilling into the square. The weight of it pressed heavy on Mallory where he stood apart, his face darkening with each word. "Enough," Mallory roared, shoving through the line of deputies who no longer looked so certain. His hand tore for the pistol at his hip, but Jared was faster. His rifle came up smooth, instinct born of nights guarding cattle and days living by the gun. Mallory's pistol barely cleared leather before Jared's shot cracked the morning open. The sheriff staggered, eyes wide, clutching at his chest where the bullet had torn through. He fell hard into the dust, the echo of the gunshot ringing against the storefronts. His blood spread quick into the earth, dark and final. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Then slowly the murmur shifted, no longer fear, but release. Chains invisible had snapped in that square. Jared lowered the rifle. His chest heaved once, then steadied. He turned to Ayoka. The crowd's eyes shifted with him. Where once they saw an enemy, they now saw a woman who had stood against fire, guns, and lies without breaking. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others simply watched in quiet awe. Jared moved to the edge of the square where his stallion waited, still soot-stained but alive. He untied the reins and placed them in Ayoka's hands. "He's yours," Jared said. "He carried us both through the fire." "Let him carry you home." She mounted with grace, her figure tall against the rising sun. For a long moment their eyes held, two souls scarred by loss, bound not by words but by what they had endured together. "Ride free," Jared whispered, his voice rough with something deeper than exhaustion. "And know you've left one man changed." She gave a faint nod, then turned the stallion toward the horizon. Hooves struck sparks from the stone as she rode away. her silhouette sharp against the morning light until it blurred with the distance. Jared stood in the square as the town slowly scattered. The smoke lifting, the dawn opening wide. He felt the old vow stir within him, reshaped, renewed. Never again, he told himself. Never again would the innocent pay for the greed of the powerful. The wind shifted, carrying the last trace of fire away. Jared tightened his grip on the token, now warm from his hand. The day had begun, and justice at last had found its ground.